Only 15% of those who watch my videos are subscribed. Please don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy my content. This helps me a lot. Enjoy the video. In this true crime story, we witness how love, secrets, and a shattered identity unravel into a horrifying tragedy. What happens when the person you trust the most holds a truth so dark it turns love into fury? The city of Washington glittered beneath the soft, fading light of spring. Cherry blossoms, iconic to the capital, bloomed along the sidewalks as the newlyweds, Jaden Carter and Alana Collins, returned home from their honeymoon. The sight of the couple radiated joy, drawing the gaze of passers-by who envied their blissful union. They were, in every sense, the picture of modern romance. Two successful individuals, deeply in love, who had conquered all odds to find one another. At 30 years old, Jaden had built a life many could only dream of. Tall, muscular, and strikingly handsome, with deep brown skin and sharp features, Jaden commanded attention wherever he went. His charisma was as undeniable as his intellect. As one of the top attorneys at a prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C., Jaden had carved out a life of luxury and respect. He grew up in the inner city, facing adversity and systemic barriers that could have easily derailed his success. But he defied the odds. Now he had it all: a beautiful home, a thriving career, and a stunning wife by his side. Alana Collins, on the other hand, was equally impressive. At 28, she was a rising star in the fashion industry, with her designs featured in high-end boutiques across the city. Her delicate features, long dark hair, and almond-shaped eyes gave her an air of mystery that often left people captivated. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches with a slender, graceful figure, Alana exuded confidence and elegance. Her deep brown eyes held secrets, emotions tucked away beneath her calm, collected exterior. She had a way of making anyone feel important in her presence, her warmth and charm lighting up every room she entered. But beneath Alana's poise and beauty lay a secret that had defined much of her life. She had been born Allen, a transgender woman who had undergone gender-affirming surgery in her mid-20s. It was a truth she had locked away, hoping that the person she became would be enough, that the love she shared with Jaden would never have to face the shadows of her past. They had met 3 years ago at a charity gala hosted by one of Jaden's clients. It had been an instant connection, an electric spark that neither of them could ignore. For Jaden, Alana represented everything he desired: beauty, intelligence, independence, and compassion. Alana, for her part, had fallen in love with Jaden's ambition, his strength, and the way he made her feel truly seen. For the first time in her life, Alana felt she could leave her past behind and embrace a future free of judgment and fear. Their courtship was fast, intense, and filled with passion. Within a year, Jaden proposed in the heart of the city, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial under the night sky. It was a moment out of a fairy tale, and Alana had said yes with tears in her eyes. The wedding, held just months before, had been equally magical, an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. Everyone who knew them believed they were destined for a lifetime of happiness. But marriage is a delicate balance of trust and honesty, and Alana's secret was a time bomb waiting to explode. As they returned from their honeymoon, Jaden couldn't stop admiring his wife, still glowing from their week spent on the sun-drenched beaches of the Caribbean. Alana looked stunning, her skin bronzed from the sun, her laughter infectious. For Jaden, this was the life he had always dreamed of: a beautiful home in a posh neighborhood of Washington, D.C., a wife he adored, and a career that fulfilled him. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. The first night back in their home was filled with tender moments: wine on the balcony, stolen kisses, and whispered dreams about the future. But even in those moments of closeness, there were small, barely noticeable things about Alana that started to gnaw at the back of Jaden's mind. The little things that, when put together, seemed off. There were the unexplained doctor's visits. Jaden had always assumed they were routine checkups or related to the stress of her fashion career, but something about the way Alana brushed off his casual inquiries now seemed evasive. Then there was the hidden stash of medications Jaden stumbled upon while helping unpack after the honeymoon. He didn't know what they were for, but they weren't the over-the-counter variety. Alana had mentioned nothing of it, so Jaden set the thought aside. It wasn't until now that it began to nag at him. Their first week back at home passed uneventfully. Dinners with friends, catching up on work emails, resuming their routines. But the perfect calm started to crack one evening as they sat in the living room watching television. Alana excused herself to the bathroom, leaving Jaden alone on the couch. As his eyes wandered aimlessly around the room, they landed on one of Alana's old journals perched on the bookshelf. It wasn't like Jaden to snoop, but an uneasy curiosity overcame him. Maybe it was the small oddities he'd been noticing. Maybe it was just paranoia from being newly married and still learning about his wife's past. He pulled the journal from the shelf and flipped through it absent-mindedly, a twinge of guilt hitting him. But then, something caught his eye. A letter folded neatly between the pages. The paper was yellowed with age, its creases worn from being handled too many times. Jaden's eyes scanned the heading. Dr. Carlisle Gender Confirmation Clinic. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted to the date. 5 years ago. His stomach clenched and his breath caught in his throat. He read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. The letter spoke of gender reassignment surgery, hormone therapy, and medical evaluations. Jaden's hands began to shake, disbelief and confusion clouding his mind. He dropped the journal as if it had burned him. Everything in the room felt surreal, like the walls were closing in on him. His wife was once someone else. His wife, the woman he had vowed to spend the rest of his life with, had kept this monumental truth hidden from him. He couldn't believe it, refused to believe it. How could she not have told him? How could she have let him marry her without knowing? Jaden felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal wash over him. The room felt too small, too suffocating. He paced back and forth, his mind spiraling in all directions. His love for Alana was being swallowed by an all-consuming rage that he didn't recognize within himself. Later that night, when Alana returned to bed, Jaden lay stiff beside her, his heart pounding as his mind replayed the words of the letter. He stared at the ceiling, wide awake, while Alana slept soundly next to him. His thoughts were jumbled, teetering between fury and despair. He could still feel her warmth next to him, could still hear her breathing, but to him, she was a stranger now. Everything they had, everything they shared, felt like a lie. As the days passed, Jaden's anger festered. He couldn't look at Alana the same way anymore. He avoided her, refusing to engage in their usual conversations, offering only clipped responses to her attempts at intimacy. Alana sensed something was wrong, but every time she asked, Jaden would brush her off, telling her he was just stressed from work. But it was more than that. The love that had once bound them was slowly unraveling in Jaden's mind, replaced by a growing sense of dread and betrayal. How could he have missed it? How could the person he trusted the most keep something so enormous from him? Jaden felt trapped, like his entire marriage was a house of cards that had come crashing down. One evening, Alana confronted him after dinner, her voice trembling. Jaden, what's going on? You've been distant ever since we got back. Did I do something? Jaden's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to yell, to throw the letter in her face and demand answers. But all he could do was stare at her, his expression cold and distant. You should have told me, he whispered, his voice hollow. You should have told me the truth. Alana froze, her heart dropping into the pit of her stomach. The color drained from her face as she realized what he was talking about. She had hoped this day would never come, that her past would remain in the shadows, buried beneath the life they had built together. But now it was out in the open, exposed in the harshest light. I didn't think it would matter anymore, Alana said, her voice barely a whisper. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm still the same person, Jaden. I'm still me. But to Jaden, she wasn't. The person he had fallen in love with, the person he thought he knew, was gone. The walls of their home, once filled with warmth and laughter, were now heavy with tension. Jaden couldn't escape the gnawing ache of betrayal. The letter's words echoed in his mind every moment he spent near Alana. His wife, his perfect wife, was a stranger to him now. The revelation of her past identity was more than just a secret. It felt like a deceit that had stained everything they shared. His mind spiraled in all directions, consumed by thoughts of rage, confusion, and horror. Every time Jaden looked at Alana, he no longer saw the woman he married. He saw Alan, the person she used to be. His thoughts were dark, twisted, growing more unstable by the day. His rational mind, the one that had served him so well in his law career, was now clouded by fury. Each conversation, each glance, even her presence in the same room made his skin crawl. Alana's beauty, which had once captivated him, now felt like a cruel lie, a mask that had been shattered by the truth. Days turned into weeks, and Jaden's anger festered like an untreated wound. The marriage bed, once a place of passion and intimacy, had become a battleground of silence and distance. He avoided Alana as much as possible, finding excuses to stay at work late or disappearing into his office for hours. When they did speak, their conversations were short and clipped, with Alana always on the verge of tears and Jaden teetering on the edge of an outburst. But as much as he tried to distance himself, Jaden's obsession with Alana's past only deepened. He began to question everything about their relationship, replaying moments from the past in his mind with this new lens. He combed through her social media profiles, scouring for any clues he might have missed. He even contacted mutual friends under the guise of casual conversation, subtly probing for information about Alana's life before they met. It wasn't long before his obsession took a darker turn. One night, after yet another cold, silent dinner, Jaden found himself alone in the living room. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the walls. Alana had retreated to the bedroom, sensing his growing hostility, but not knowing how to bridge the widening chasm between them. Jaden, pacing the floor like a caged animal, couldn't stop his mind from racing. His thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and something else. Something darker that had been growing inside him ever since he found that letter. In a fit of frustration, Jaden pulled out his laptop and began digging deeper into Alana's past. He hacked into her old email account, something he had never done before, but the growing obsession pushed him past any sense of moral boundaries. His hands trembled as he clicked through old messages, digging through her digital life like a predator hunting prey. And then he found it. An old email thread between Alana and a close friend from her past. The messages were full of memories, mentions of surgeries, doctor appointments, and the emotional journey she had gone through during her transition. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest as he read through every detail, each word confirming the truth he couldn't bear to accept. She had been someone else. The woman he married was a fabrication, a lie wrapped in layers of deceit. He felt sick. Nausea gripped him, but so did something more sinister, an all-consuming rage that made his skin feel like it was on fire. He couldn't think clearly anymore. His mind was flooded with violent images, fantasies of confronting Alana, of demanding answers in ways that grew increasingly brutal in his imagination. Each scenario was darker than the last, culminating in a horrifying image of him standing over her. Blood on his hands, her lifeless body sprawled across the floor. The next morning, Jaden woke up drenched in sweat. The nightmares had been vivid, twisted versions of reality where he saw himself doing things he couldn't even describe in the daylight. But instead of feeling repelled by those visions, a part of him felt satisfied. He couldn't shake the growing need to confront Alana, to force the truth out of her in the most brutal way possible. Alana, sensing the shift in Jaden's mood, tried to reach out to him again that morning. "Jaden, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but firm. She stood in the kitchen, her delicate frame wrapped in a robe, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with. Jaden, leaning against the counter, looked at her with cold, dead eyes. His heart was racing, but his face showed no emotion. "What's there to talk about?" he replied, his voice a low growl. Alana took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that had been on the edge of her emotions for weeks. "I know I should have told you about my past before we got married. I was scared, Jaden. I thought that if you knew, you wouldn't love me the same way. But I'm still me. I'm still the woman you fell in love with. Please, can't we just talk this through?" Jaden's jaw tightened. He could feel the anger boiling inside him, threatening to spill over at any moment. He took a step toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You lied to me. You let me marry you without knowing the truth. You made me believe. You made me believe this was real." "It is real." Alana's voice cracked with desperation. "I love you, Jaden. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't think it would matter anymore, because I'm me now. I'm the woman I was always meant to be. But Jaden wasn't listening anymore. Her words sounded like hollow excuses, weak attempts to justify the lie she had lived. He couldn't see her as Alana anymore. In his mind, she was Alan, and that thought consumed him. Without warning, Jaden lunged forward, grabbing Alana by the wrist. His grip was tight, too tight. Alana winced, her eyes wide with fear. "Jaden, please, you're hurting me." But Jaden didn't care. He pulled her closer, his face inches from hers, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "Do you even know what you've done to me? You think you can just erase your past and everything's fine? You think you can hide something like that from me?" Alana's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to hide it. I was afraid, Jaden. Afraid of losing you." "You already lost me," Jaden spat, shoving her away from him with a force that sent her stumbling back into the counter. Alana gasped in pain, holding her wrist where his fingers had left bruises. For the first time, she truly saw the darkness in his eyes, the violence lurking just beneath the surface. The man she had married, the man she loved, was slipping away, and in his place was someone she didn't recognize. That night, the tension between them reached a breaking point. Jaden had been drinking, whiskey straight from the bottle, and Alana, still shaken from their earlier confrontation, had retreated to the bedroom. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath Jaden's pacing feet. His mind was a storm of anger, paranoia, and twisted thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had done, how she had deceived him, how she had made a fool of him. The violent images from his nightmares returned, but this time, they felt more real, more attainable. With the bottle in hand, Jaden staggered toward the bedroom. He pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. Alana was sitting on the bed, her back to him, staring at the wall. She didn't turn around when he entered, but she knew he was there. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. "Jaden, we need to stop this," Alana said quietly, her voice trembling. "We can't keep going like this. We need help." But Jaden wasn't listening. He walked toward her, his footsteps heavy, his breathing ragged. The bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, sending shards of glass skittering across the room. Alana flinched but didn't move. She could feel the weight of his presence behind her, the danger looming. And then, without warning, Jaden snapped. He grabbed her from behind, his hands wrapping around her neck in a vice-like grip. Alana gasped, her hands clawing at his arms, trying to pry his fingers loose, but he was too strong, too far gone. His grip tightened, cutting off her air as he pinned her down onto the bed. Alana's world began to spin, her vision darkening as she struggled for breath. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to speak, to plead with him. But no words came. All she could feel was the crushing weight of his hands around her throat, the burning in her lungs as her body fought for oxygen. Jaden's face twisted into a mask of fury, his eyes wild and unrecognizable. He didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a monster, a deceiver, someone who had taken everything from him, and in that moment, he wanted to destroy her. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls spinning as Alana's body went limp beneath him. But even as her struggles ceased, Jaden didn't let go. He couldn't. He was lost in the darkness, consumed by the rage that had been building for weeks. He wanted to punish her, to make her suffer for the pain she had caused him. And as Alana's life slipped away, Jaden's world shattered into a million pieces. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the soft creaking of the bed beneath Alana's lifeless body. Jaden stood over her, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his heart hammering in his chest. His hands still tingled with the memory of her neck, the feeling of her skin beneath his tightening fingers. For a few moments there was nothing, just a horrifying stillness. His rage, the fire that had consumed him for weeks, finally ebbed. But as the adrenaline drained from his body, reality set in. Jaden's eyes widened in horror as he looked down at what he had done. Alana's lifeless body lay sprawled on the bed, her neck marred by his bruising grip. Her eyes were still half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. There was no going back. The love of his life, the woman he once adored, was dead, and he was the one who had taken her life. The shock of his actions hit him all at once. His breath came in shallow gasps and his mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had done. How could it have come to this? How had things spiraled so far out of control? Jaden stumbled backward, his foot catching on the broken shards of glass from the whiskey bottle he had dropped earlier. He tripped, falling to the floor, his hands shaking violently. His world was crumbling, and all he could do was sit in the wreckage of what his life had become. Tears welled in his eyes, but they didn't fall. He was beyond tears. He was beyond grief. All that was left was emptiness, a deep, gaping void where his soul once was. Ilana's body didn't move. The stillness of the room was suffocating, a weight pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He crawled across the floor, desperate to escape the sight of her, desperate to flee from the horror he had created. But no matter where he turned, no matter how far he tried to push the reality away, it clung to him like a second skin. Jaden scrambled to his feet and staggered to the bathroom. He flipped the light switch, the harsh fluorescent bulbs flickering to life. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, a man he no longer recognized. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his clothes disheveled and stained with sweat. His hands were still trembling, still stained with the memory of what they had done. He turned on the faucet and plunged his hands beneath the cold water, scrubbing furiously as if he could wash away the guilt, the horror. But no matter how hard he scrubbed, the memory of Ilana's death clung to him. He could still feel her skin beneath his fingertips, still see the life draining from her eyes. God, what have I done? He whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Hours passed, though Jaden couldn't say how many. Time had become a blur, a meaningless concept in the wake of the tragedy. He wandered through the house in a daze, unable to think clearly, unable to escape the image of Ilana's body lying on the bed. His phone buzzed several times with messages and missed calls, but he ignored them all. He couldn't talk to anyone. He couldn't face the world. What would he even say? That he had killed his wife? That he had destroyed everything in a moment of uncontrollable rage? At some point, the sun began to rise, casting a pale light through the blinds of their Washington home. But even in the daylight, the darkness that had taken hold of Jaden refused to lift. It was a part of him now, a constant companion. He returned to the bedroom and stood at the door, staring at Ilana's body, unable to move. He felt sick, but the sickness was not just physical, it was in his soul. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had committed the ultimate betrayal, not just against Ilana, but against himself. Eventually, the weight of what he had done became too much. The horror, the guilt, the fear, it all threatened to crush him. He knew he couldn't keep this hidden. He couldn't live with this guilt. He had to do something. But the idea of going to the police, of confessing to his crime, filled him with dread. What would they do to him? What would happen to his life? Jaden grabbed his phone and dialed the only number he could think of, 911. His hands shook as he held the phone to his ear, listening to the dial tone, feeling as if he were in a dream. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. Jaden swallowed hard, his throat dry, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke. I killed my wife. When the police arrived, Jaden didn't resist. He didn't run. He didn't try to hide. He stood by the front door waiting for them, his hands still trembling, his face pale and blank. The officers took him into custody without incident, and Jaden watched in a daze as they entered the house, finding Ilana's body exactly where he had left her. The scene was grisly, disturbing. Ilana's once beautiful face was now marred by the signs of violence. Bruising around her neck, her lifeless eyes staring blankly ahead. The officers, hardened by years of dealing with violent crime, couldn't hide their disgust. It was a senseless murder, one rooted in a darkness that Jaden had allowed to consume him. As Jaden sat in the back of the police car, his wrist cuffed, his mind was numb. He barely registered the flashing lights, the police tape, or the neighbors gathered outside, whispering in hushed tones. He barely registered anything at all. His world had ended the moment he had taken Ilana's life. Now he was just a shell of a man, waiting for the inevitable consequences. The trial was swift. The evidence against Jaden was overwhelming, and his confession left no room for doubt. His defense attorney argued that Jaden had suffered a mental break, that the revelation of Alana's past had pushed him over the edge. But no amount of legal arguments could erase the fact that Jaden had brutally murdered the woman he had vowed to love and protect. The courtroom was packed during the trial, the case becoming a media sensation. Alana's friends and family sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of grief and anger. They had lost someone they loved, someone who had fought so hard to live her truth, only to be cut down by the man she trusted most. Jaden sat silently throughout the proceedings, his face blank, his eyes hollow. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He barely even spoke. He knew what he had done. He knew that no amount of excuses could justify the horror he had unleashed. When the verdict came, it was no surprise. Guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, stern and somber, sentenced Jaden to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence was severe, but it wasn't enough for some. Alana's family had wanted life without parole. They had wanted him to rot in a cell for the rest of his days. But Jaden didn't care. He didn't care about the sentence or the years he would spend behind bars. Nothing mattered anymore. Alana was gone, and no amount of punishment could bring her back. As the guards led him away in handcuffs, Jaden caught one last glimpse of the courtroom. He saw Alana's family, their faces etched with grief. He saw the reporters, their cameras flashing, but none of it registered. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the past, in the memories of the life he had destroyed. In prison, Jaden became a ghost of himself. He barely spoke to anyone, spending most of his time in his cell, reliving the events that had led him to this place. His fellow inmates gave him a wide berth, sensing the darkness that clung to him like a shroud. He had nothing left. No future, no hope, no redemption. Jaden's fate was sealed the moment he gave in to the rage that had consumed him. Now, all that remained was the slow, agonizing passage of time, each day a reminder of the life he had lost and the life he had taken. In the end, it wasn't just Alana who had died that night. A part of Jaden had died too, lost forever in the darkness of his own making.